Contra where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault, and today we are talking about neon films again. In the last episode, I charted the history of neon and where they started and where they are today and how they managed to win a Best Picture Oscar only 3 years into the company's formation. And joining me as we talk about our favorite neon films is Royce Benson. Royce, you'll probably remember he was on the Top 10 A24 episode, and he was also in the Life During Quarantine episode as well. Royce, I'm so excited to have you back because it's kind of similar to our A24 one where we get kind of just geek out about films. So thank you for doing this with me again.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to get into it.
So we talked earlier, I guess it was probably late spring, early summer, we were talking about we've been watching, things like that. How has anything changed for you? Have you been able to catch up on some more stuff on your watch list, or how's that been going?
It's been pretty up and down for the most part. I want to say I haven't been really watching a lot of TV. I've been trying to watch a lot of films more. What I've been doing recently is when a lot of directors have been releasing newer films, I've been going back and catching up on films I haven't seen by them. For instance, for a little bit, I was watching a bunch of Kaufman's films because he released I'm Thinking of Ending Things onto Netflix, and so I thought, I've never seen any of his films, so let me go back and watch those first. And so I've been doing a little bit of that. I guess I'm kind of at that point right now where I'm kind of trying to make more structured lists for what I want to watch, because there's films that are on my priorities and then there's ones that aren't. So it's a little bit of a difficult balance, I think. But yeah, I've just been having a little bit of fun with it, just kind of watching stuff I want to watch, and then stuff that's on my watch list that's been there for a while, and then plus new stuff that's coming out. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. There'll be times where I'll be there's one specific film by a filmmaker or something where I'll be oh yeah, I've always wanted to watch this. But then I kind of feel I need to augment that a little bit by checking out some other things. Even if I have other stuff I'd rather be watching, I'd be I got into Akira Kurosawa a couple of years ago. I was I really want to see Seven Samurai. I've never seen Seven Samurai. That's every film nerd has to see that. So I was all right, I'm going to watch that, which I loved it. Fantastic movie. And I'm all right, now I kind of feel I need to watch a few more of his movies to totally get his vibe. So for the next little while, I was trying to crank out a couple Kurosawa films just so I can be able to have a better informed opinion and not just be oh yeah, Seven Samurai, yeah, I've seen that but nothing else. So I definitely understand what you're talking about, where you want to have a bit more of a theme going on for what you're watching.
Yeah, definitely. I know, just you talking about Kurosawa, I've only seen Seven Samurai, so now you just talking about that makes me, I think I might have to put that on my priority list, because I've been meaning to get his films for a while, but
it's tough because
I haven't done it yet. So.
He's sort of someone like Alfred Hitchcock, where he's probably got about 8 to 10 stone cold classics where you can say you've seen a couple and they're yeah, but have you seen this one? And it's all right, I'll watch that next.
You're not a real cinephile if you haven't seen.
Oh God, I wake up in night sweats with that thought.
What do you mean you don't have the Criterion copy of
it? The bootleg version with the alternate commentary.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my god.
But back on topic, we're talking about neon films. As I mentioned, the last week's episode was the history of neon, and I charted how they got their start and what their big releases throughout their history was. But I, as usual, I sort of remove myself as far as my thoughts on these films in particular. And, what better way than actually talk about this? So the way this works is we each made a top 5 list, and there were no duplicates. So once a movie has been chosen, it cannot be chosen by the other person. That doesn't mean, you can't appreciate or or even love the different movies that are on the other person's list, but it just sort of makes it a little bit more interesting. That way we get to talk about 10 different films. So let's get right into this. And what's your number 5 movie?
My name is Lily Colson, and I'm 18 years old. These are my 3 best friends, Em, Bex, and Sarah. And this is the story of how my town, Salem, lost its mind. But let's start at the beginning.
My number 5 film for this list is Assassination Nation, which is a 2018 film directed by Sam Levinson. And the synopsis essentially reads, high school senior Lily and her group of friends live in a haze of texts, posts, selfies, and chats, just like the rest of the world. So when an anonymous hacker starts posting details from the private lives of everyone in their small town, the result is absolute madness, leaving Lily and her friends questioning whether they'll live through the night. Now, it barely just broke my list. When I originally watched the film, I actually didn't give it a rating at all because I was really conflicted about it. And I'm sure as you can talk about a little bit later, it is kind of a mess of a film in general. There's a lot of great ideas at play. Like there's like the concepts that are at play in the film are really interesting, but they're not always executed well. But you kind of have to give props to them for even like, I guess, pointing out those ideas in film. Like I see the film, it's mostly kind of as a satire about, I guess, the new Gen Z, I guess, communities, like this newer generation that's coming up, living surrounded by, constant interactions with each other, and what exactly would happen if, everyone just literally snapped and went crazy. We're seeing this today. I think even though it came out a couple years ago, it's so applicable today when you're seeing, these viral videos of insane violence taking place, and we don't even really blink about it anymore. We see these crazy things happen in our everyday lives, and it's so interconnected through social media. People have literal instant access, and it's terrifying because some of the content is explicit, and kids are even viewing it, but because it's so accessible through social media, because everyone has a device, it's so easy. And I think a lot of the ideas that were at play kind of in this film, I think he does, Sam, the director, does a little bit better later on, because now he's known for Euphoria, which is a show that he wrote the script for and directed for HBO that has a lot of critical acclaim. It's gotten a couple, awards. But I think what I like a lot about him as a director is his sense of style. He has this very intense way of which he depicts young people. It's very stylized, and it's one of those cases where I think it could easily fall into like style over substance. Just in the sense where there's a lot of like more shots that are like, oh, that looks cool, but like, does it have meaning? And so I get where a lot of people, when they initially saw this film, they were like, there's just a lot of like violence and sex just for the sake of it. But I guess if you kind of take it from like more of like a satire, it makes a little bit more sense. So it might take a rewatch for me possibly to kind of have any definitive thoughts on it. But I'm interested to see what you think about it personally.
Yeah, this was a movie I watched when I saw that you were liking it, and so I checked it out just before we recorded, and I would say this movie is a lot. You're right about talking about the satire of social media. That's a big thing. I think it also really does an interesting critique on things like cancel culture and the 24-hour news cycle that is, been around now for 20 plus years now, where there's always a story, a breaking news story, and this is this sort of thing that's happening. And also, I think he does a great job of just sort of cramming a little bit of everything into it, because I'm sure if, we were to watch it again and, you set aside the social media aspect and the cancel culture aspect, there's a whole lot of other things. This idea of what does it mean to be a feminist and different aspects like that. So there's a whole lot of really interesting things going on. At the end of the day, I think maybe he has more ideas than he has time and ability to properly flesh out. I would almost compare it to, I don't know if you saw the movie a couple years ago, Sorry to Bother You, with Lakeith Stanfield.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Really interesting movie, really crazy, ridiculous ending, which I won't spoil for anyone that hasn't seen it. Great premise, but it's a similar sort of movie where Boots Riley, the director, sort of just threw everything into it. Every sort of critique you can make about society is in there, whether it's, class, wage, race, sexuality, everything going on in that. He just slams it all in there for better or for worse. And I sort of, Assassination Nation resembles that a little bit, but maybe done through the lens of someone like Nicholas Winding Refn, who did Drive and The Neon Demon and Only God Forgives, where you got this like super stylized, very clear vision, very popping colors, beautiful in your face violence and sexuality, where it's just, it's almost so beautiful where it's hard to define what is the sex and what is the violence, because it's shot so elegantly with, these gorgeous tracking shots and the camera swirling around upside down. Like there's this fantastic shot where there's one of the girls standing on the American flag and like the camera's upside down and it's dollying away from her, and you're just like, whoa, what an incredible shot. But it's one of those things where, there's a lot going on in this movie.
Yeah, no, honestly, I really agree with a lot of different points you made. And I did get an NWR vibes from watching it as well. And yeah, I also do really like your comparison to Sorry to Bother You, because I think it kind of has a lot of similar flaws in that way. So I do like the direction a lot of these, creators are taking by kind of getting this like controversial content and kind of molding it into a creative, sometimes funny, sometimes really disturbing way. But hopefully these are just kind of stepping stones for them, that hopefully if they want to revisit some of the ideas maybe later on in like a mini series or something like that, I think have a lot of potential. As I don't know if you've seen Euphoria, but like I can't say enough amazing things about that show. And just watching his progression from like that film to that show, where he like really like kind of like you were talking about, he really explores the ideas of like sexuality and drugs and adolescence, and he kind of stretched it out to more of like a mini series. And all those cool stylized shots were still there. It looks cool. There were some really good beats. But then it was also thematically like, fantastic. Like the character arcs were great. You cared about each character. And so I really like what you're saying. There needs to be that balance between style and then it actually being like not just shot like it's like a music video. It can look cool, but like have no, that, which a lot of people are arguing, like, Michael Bay does that. And so I think when you can find that balance, I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, I would rather watch a movie like this, like Sorry to Bother You, where there's a little bit too much going on, than a boring movie. Because in my opinion, the cardinal sin of movie making is making a bad, boring movie. Sorry, not even bad, just boring movie. I would rather watch something that's interesting and bad than good but boring.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like there's a lot of movies I like that are just insanity, and it's like they're sometimes not even really like well made, but they're entertaining. And it's like I would rather much watch that than some like indie film where it's just like that, it's just like they're just talking, So I totally get what you're saying. Like sometimes films like this, they're just, even if you don't take a lot away from it, you're still gonna have a great time.
Yep.
You're not gonna get like bored, I guess.
All right, so moving on to my number 5 pick. I've got 3 Identical Strangers from 2018, directed by Tim Wardle. In 1980 New York, 3 young men who are all adopted meet each other and find out they're triplets who were separated at birth, but their quest to find out why turns into a bizarre and sinister mystery. I'm such a sucker for a good documentary that has an interesting hook to it. I'll watch pretty much any documentary, but like something like this where like it really catches your eye and they do a great job. I would compare it to something like Man on Wire, where they have like the talking head interview, but they also do a little bit of recreation of the actual events. So I really like this sort of style. And you get this story where you get this one guy who's going off to college and everyone's like, hey buddy, how's it going? Haven't seen you for a while. And he's like, what? I've never met you guys before. This is the first time I've been in this building. And then like someone's like, oh my God, you are identical to this person. And then sure enough, they realize they meet and they're like, wow, this is an identical person. We're twins, they later find out. And then they're in the newspaper, and then some other guy's reading it was like, oh my God, how come my picture is there twice in the same photo? What's up with this? And so he meets up with them and they're triplets. And then from there, like this is another one where like you don't really want to spoil, but like the story just keeps getting crazier and crazier when you find out why they were separated, why their adopted parents were never told about the other ones, and all this sort of stuff where it's just like it seems like every scene you get such a revelation that blows your mind, where that could be the entire premise of the movie, but there's like 10, 15, 20 different crazy revelations that by the end of it you're just like, how can this be real? But they're on TV, they're in the newspapers, they're like, there is actual footage of all this stuff happening that it can't be made up.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right. And what this, even though it didn't make my list, I very much enjoyed it. And I think what this film really encouraged me to do was watch a lot more documentaries, because I've not nearly seen enough documentaries, and there's plenty of great ones out there. And I think this one's really no different. Like it feels like a lot of the newer documentaries I've been seeing, this one included, they do very much have like a cinematic quality to them, where it's like, even how it's shot, it's never boring. How it's intercut between, like you were talking about, like the dramatization of the real life events, and then intercut with the different siblings and how those reveals kind of take place. I thought was incredibly well done. And yeah, the story is absolutely insane. I really don't want to give away the ending, because it floored me personally. But yeah, it's just one of those stories where it's like, it's so insane. It's kind of that idea that sometimes it's so crazy you couldn't have written it. Like reality sometimes
is stranger
crazier
than
fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely one of those films. And yeah, it was a really amazing, heartwarming story. I really loved it. I'd encourage anyone to watch this film.
Yeah, it's heartwarming, but at the same time, there is a bit of a darkness to this, especially as the movie goes on, and you sort of realize, like, it's a little bit of a tough subject to sort of dance around, but there's someone important in this story that isn't giving their side, and we learn why later on, why that's happening, because the whole time you're watching, you're like, we're missing a perspective from someone. What's going on here? And they purposely, I guess, edit it around it to make that a bit of a reveal that happens later on, because they're telling the story chronologically. But yeah, just these triplets, their story is just so unbelievable. That, like, yeah, you say you can't believe it, but it's absolutely true, because I can't remember what it is, but like they're on like the Sally Jesse Raphael show or some other like daytime talk show that was big in the 80s, whatever it was. And so like you have this actual footage where they are able to incorporate it. And then they're also going through court records and bankers' boxes filled with documents and reading original notes taken by the adoption agency. So like none of this stuff is fake. None of this is staged. This is all legitimate, where they show you the original documents. And something like that is just like so baffling that such a thing could happen. And it's mostly lighthearted, but there is a real darkness to it that sort of makes you sort of question humanity as a whole.
And then just the last point I wanted to make about this, kind of like you pointed out, there is darkness in the film, in the documentary, as they reveal later on. But what really creeped me out was that Austrian, she was that older lady that was like a doctor.
Yeah, the assistant.
And whenever they had interviews with her and like how she was explaining stuff, I'm like, this lady's like a villain. She's so evil. Like I was like, you can't make this up. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, you have such a hard time wrapping your mind around how something like this could even happen. But I don't know, even though there was a lot of darkness, as you mentioned, I came away very optimistic about it. And I thought it did a great job. I think it served the purpose that the filmmakers were going for.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think this sort of thesis of this documentary is nature versus nurture, and how we are raised as people, and what sort of effects do we have. And it sort of, lays the groundwork for both are true. All right. So what is your number 4 film, Royce?
My fourth film is the 2019 film Manos, directed by Alejandro Landes. And the synopsis reads, on a faraway mountaintop, 8 teenage gorillas with guns watch over a hostage and a conscripted milk cow. Playing games and initiating cult-like rituals, the children run amok in the village, in the jungle, and disaster strikes when the hostage tries to escape. Now, when I was looking through on Hulu, and I was scrolling down through a lot of the different, because they have a pretty large selection of Neon's catalog in there, I came upon it. I watched the trailer. I was like, this looks really intriguing and interesting. And I honestly wasn't that disappointed by the film when I watched it. I remember seeing the trailer randomly back when it came out a couple years ago, but I never really heard much about it after that. And from what I read, it's the directors. It looks like I think it's their sophomore feature. I think their first film was a documentary. But essentially, where it was, as the director was explaining in an interview, he was talking about how the film was essentially supposed to take place during a 6-year civil war that was happening in Colombia, and I forgot what time period it's supposed to be in. I think it was set during the modern era, at least the real conflict. This film's definitely set during the modern era, but it's a really interesting premise where it's basically it's a pretty short film. It's less than 2 hours, but it's a very suffocating film. When I watched it, I got a lot of Lord of the Flies vibes from it. You don't really get any backstory on who these children are, who this captive is. You don't really know too much about them. The film just kind of takes you there, and they're just on this mountaintop above the clouds. It's beautiful panning shots they do at the beginning, and you're kind of introduced to this world of these kids carrying, or these minors, teenagers carrying around like these assault rifles that are as tall as them, and acting like adolescents, like not being very mature, but yet they're still soldiers in this, in this militia, and you don't really know about which side of the conflict they're on, and that's not really important because it's really about the characters, not the politics that they're, supporting or backing. And I think that's what really serves to be a really an interesting look at least child soldiers, especially in like the Colombian conflict. But I guess I have to say, like, just in general about the film, it was, like I said, it's like a very nauseating film. It's I don't even know how they shot a lot of those shots, because they go from the high mountains to the deep jungle areas. And so I'm sure like the shooting process was very complicated, and it took a lot of work, but it's a gorgeously shot film. And yeah, I would say it's a gem that's really been overlooked by a lot of people, and I would recommend it to anyone, really.
Interesting. Yeah, this is the only one on your list that I haven't seen, so I can't comment or even really ask you much about it. But yeah, when I was looking at which movies I wanted to see and didn't want to see, this is one I really didn't hear about. So I unfortunately got shafted into my not on my list of ones I was trying to catch up with before this episode. So, but all the way you're describing it definitely makes me want to check it out.
Yeah, I would highly recommend. It's a great film.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything else you want to add about, or are we good to move on?
I think we can move on, yeah.
All right, so my number 4 movie is Wild Rose, directed by Tom Harper.
Your Lordship, Miss Harlan has put her childish ways behind her. Her children are living with her once again.
Do you miss me?
She is a promising young country singer.
I'm trying to get to Nashville.
Well, you better mind your tab doesn't he go off when you're going through security.
She now works full-time as a daily woman.
A troubled young Glaswegian woman dreams of becoming a Nashville country star. This is a movie that stars Jessie Buckley, who it really was her big coming out party. She looks to be, the next big Hollywood star. You're talking about, you're watching some Charlie Kaufman movies. She was the lead in I'm Thinking of Ending Things, the Netflix movie earlier this year. And she's just got such a unique presence to her. But yeah, here she is playing a young Scottish woman who wants to be a country and western star, as she repeatedly corrects people who just call her a country singer or something like that. Country and western, which is, a very specific subgenre of country music. Often we think of country music as, talking about your pickup truck, your beers, your dog, and how your woman broke your heart, basically. And there's a little bit of that, but there's much more honesty and truth to the country and western genre, much more related to the sort of bad boy 1950s era, that sort of country music. where there's just so much emotion to it, where you would almost relate it to the blues and that sort of style, where it's very simple in the chord progression. It's not complicated music. It's just beautiful, honest, heartfelt music. And Jessie Buckley plays this character named Rosalind, who is a down on her luck woman who is, desperately trying to make it as a country singer, while also is a mother of two, and really, she's getting out of prison and getting her mother to help her take care of her kids. She doesn't really have her life together, a whole bunch of stuff. But it's just the sort of movie where the lead performer's charisma absolutely carries you through the whole way. And when it's a movie about music, the music has to be top notch as well. And whether or not you're a fan of the country and western sort of style, I do like that sort of classic country vibe. I am a fan of that, the Johnny Cash era. And they absolutely nail it out of the park. And there's the theme song that plays a couple times through it, just absolutely phenomenal. And when she does her end performance of it, it just, absolutely knocks it out of the park and breaks your heart in half, and you're basically sobbing by the end of it. But it's just such a stunning one woman performance where she really carries this whole movie and is able to take you on this big epic journey while still being very intimate at the same time. Was this one that you were able to catch up with?
It was one of the last films I squeezed in right before we recorded this, and I do agree with you on a lot of your points. I do think it's definitely Jessie's performance that really carries the film, because in my opinion, I don't really think the film is able ever to reach her level. I think her performance is fantastic. It really makes the film memorable, but the main structure of the film, it kind of follows a lot of those story beats we've seen before. Mm-hmm. And I do think that I think that doesn't really help the film in many ways, but it's kind of a hard film not to love, because you're so committed to her character and you want to see her succeed, even though she's not, she's sometimes not the best mom, or she's sometimes not the best friend to other people, but she's trying. So to see this flawed individual, trying to make it, you can't help but root for her. Mm-hmm. And I do really like how they keep bringing it back, like the whole film where she has tattooed on her shoulder 3 chords in the truth, mm-hmm. which is an obvious reference to that's what country music is. And I think, and what I really liked about that in particular is how a lot of cultures outside of the U.S., even if you've never been to the U.S., country music is one of those huge staples of American culture. And at least for me, growing up in the U.S., it's one of those things where country music kind of brings hope. And so for people that are outside of the U.S., they kind of latch on to that, because it's that idea, like, it's super simple, like 3 chords on a guitar and just singing lyrics that are very heartfelt, and they bring so much of the human soul out. And that's why this character is so driven to be a country singer. And so yeah, I really love her performance, but the rest of the film really didn't stand out to me, and that's what's really kind of that's why I wasn't able to put it on my list. But I do love it for a lot of the same reasons you do.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I know when it came out, there were some people that were a little hesitant about really getting on board with it. There's just a few moments that really work for me. There's a fun little moment when she's working as a housekeeper and she's vacuuming around the house, and in her mind she's singing along with the music that she's listening to, and all of a sudden a backing band appears throughout the house, and it's just like a really cool, inventive way to showcase how her brain thinks. And then of course every actual live performance, whether she's in her local country bar that she's playing there, there's a bit of a heartbreaking scene where she's playing at a party for the house that she's working for. They throw her a little party where she's the sort of music guest of honor, and that doesn't really go very well. But of course the final sequence where she's actually made it and is coming back home and performing that theme song, it's just so heartbreaking, while also simultaneously being an incredibly powerful performance of a song.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
All right, what's your number 3 movie?
My number 3 pick is the 2020 film Palm Springs, directed by Max Barbakow.
It's going to be a beautiful wedding. Good day so far? Today, tomorrow, it's all the same.
You! What is going on? Hey, get out of the water!
Guess you followed me. It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
That I might have heard about.
Yeah.
The synopsis reads, when carefree Niles, reluctant Milan, or Sarah have a chance encounter at a Palm Springs wedding, things get complicated as they are unable to escape the venue themselves or each other. Now, I really loved this film. Before I even watched it, I was a huge fan of Andy Samberg. I've kept up with his band, The Lonely Island. I think they're hilarious. His film Pop Store, I thought was great. Him on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's a great show. I highly recommend that. And so I already loved his charisma out of the gate, and he brings it to this film once again, paired very nicely with his co-star Kristen. Melody.
Melody, yeah.
Melody. Thank you. I thought they both gave a great dual performance. Their chemistry on screen was insanely. It was just perfect. It was one of those when you see that chemistry in it, even if they were. It was only like within the first couple minutes they were on screen. I was like, they're perfect together for this film, and it does definitely give like a lot of throwbacks to the film with Bill Murray. Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Groundhog Day, exactly. So a lot, and so it obviously has like a lot of references to it. But I actually like this film a lot more than Groundhog Day because I think they get the premise of what makes Groundhog Day really good, and they kind of expand on that.
Mm-hmm.
But they make it funny, but also tragic at the same time in just the right way. It's so entertaining watching them going through the different intervals, whether it be, going to a bar and picking a fight with some, bikers, or like going in a plane and then like crashing the plane or something like that. Like there's just those little moments in between where they're just screwing around and having the time of their lives is really funny. But then when you learn about the characters, later on where they start, delving into, actual, like they love each other. I feel like both of the actors really sell that.
Yeah. And
I think it's a film that's, it's a really beautiful, intimate story at the end of the day. Even though there's a lot of comedy, I think people can come away with a lot from it. And another side note too is I love J.K. Simmons' supporting role. I think he's an amazing kind of antagonist to Andy Samberg. I guess I won't really give away how he fits in, but just his role on the side as Roy, I think is hilarious. And I love what they do with that.
Yeah, JK kind of like shows up every once in a while. You kind of forget about his character, and then he shows up for like 5 minutes, absolutely destroys the scenes he's in, and then like goes off for like the next half hour. Every time he shows up, yeah, it's absolutely killer, which you'd expect nothing less from an actor of his caliber. But you're totally right. I think for me is I'm a big Andy Samberg fan too. I love Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I love Pop Star. I loved his SNL days, things like that. I feel like as time goes on, every project that Andy Samberg does, our perception of him changes ever so slightly. Coming out of SNL in the Lonely Island phase, he could have basically been Adam Sandler's son. I know he did play that in a movie, That's Your Boy or whatever it was, where we sort of expected this sort of frat boyish sort of style. But every time he does something, it slowly changes our perception of who he is as a performer. And I think it's really rounded out his career nicely. And I think it sort of culminates in this, where we go in and being like, great, it's the Andy Samberg show. But he has the ability to lay back a little bit and let his co-star, Kristen Milotti, sort of take the forefront in a lot of the scenes, especially later on in the movie, and really sort of let her character develop and grow from there and really sort of steal the show in a lot of the scenes. And that's something that I wouldn't have expected. If this movie had come out 10 years ago, I would not have expected something like this. But now, at this point, I hope for something like this, and he delivers. Just because he's in the background a little bit, that doesn't mean he's not worth paying attention to, or he's not still giving an amazing performance. He's just able to support his co-stars in a way that a great performer has the ability to do. And I think that takes a lot of time and a lot of talent for someone that has such a personality that he does.
Yeah, I fully agree. And honestly, I had such a great time with this. Like I laughed. I haven't laughed like in a movie in a long time. So just like watching it, it was such an enjoyable experience. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Andy Samberg continues, to prove what an excellent actor he is outside of just doing, simple skits. I think he could even prove to be a great dramatic actor as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd be interested in the future if he tried doing something that didn't rely so much on comedy, because I definitely see that side of him. I think it'd be interesting in the next couple of years to kind of see where his career goes and what roles he chooses, because I think literally for him, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I compared him to Adam Sandberg, sort of derisively, I guess is the word I'm looking for here. But also at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe has that sort of Adam Sandler gene in him, where he can do something like Punch Drunk Love or Uncut Gems, where he really can turn in that sort of dramatic role that we didn't expect but blow our minds.
Oh, 100%. He could very well, next couple of years, who knows, A24 might make a film with him. I can honestly see that, so I'm really excited for whatever he does next. Yeah. But what was your number 3 film?
My number 3 is I, Tonya from 2017, directed by Craig Gillespie.
The haters always say, Tonya, tell the truth. There's no such thing as truth. Everyone has their own truth.
I was the best figure skater in the world at one point in time.
Competitive ice skater Tonya Harding rises amongst the ranks of U.S. figure skating competitions, but her future in the activity is thrown into doubt when her ex-husband intervenes. So, you're obviously far too young. Even I'm a little bit too young. I kind of, know the jokes. You would see clips of it in TV shows or movies or online from late night talk show hosts, where whatever, the big story of the year was, and the sort of Tonya Harding, that sort of stuff. I remember, Jay Leno and David Letterman talking about it, but I obviously was too young as well, because this was the early 90s. So I didn't really know the Tonya Harding story. I just kind of know, oh yeah, she got her husband or whatever to put a hit out on her rival skater and blew out her knee, and now she's this disgraced figure skater. That's basically all I really knew. And I know some people sort of that grew up with it were really apprehensive of the sort of rehabbing of her image, especially because she really was sort of making the rounds. I think she was on either like Dancing with the Stars or some crap like that at the time, not around that same area. But this was like, Margot Robbie became famous due to Wolf of Wall Street, and she was basically just a pretty face in that. And this was really her showing that she's like a serious, fantastic actor. It's funny, it's dark, it's serious, it makes you emotional, it's got a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just so innovative the way it's shot. You've got Allison Janney, who playing the character as an older woman, the mother of Tonya Harding, doing these like film TV interviews, and she's got this like ridiculous little parakeet on her shoulder while she's like alternating between her oxygen mask and chain smoking at the same time, and talking about how she raised her daughter in an abusive household and how she's proud of it and all this ridiculous stuff. And you're just like, what is going on? And of course, like in the end credits, they show the actual footage of these interviews, which, brings us back to Three Identical Strangers of sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. But Margot Robbie is just so magnetic in this. And she's surrounded by two fantastic male performers in Sebastian Stan, who most people know as Bucky Barnes from the Marvel movies, but Paul Walter Hauser, who is the real sort of standout in this as her ex-husband's friend, who is Tonya Harding's head of security. Just this ridiculous character where he talks about how he was, trained by the FBI, which he clearly wasn't, and he can't divulge information. He's got just the ridiculous deadpan. This is the type of movie where it's just so hilarious to watch, but also at the same time, what's coming, and the downfall is so swift and hard that you also can't help but feel bad. I don't quite vindicate Tonya Harding from all of this, but at the same time, I definitely understand her story a lot better.
Yeah, kind of like what you brought up. I'm way too young to remember any of that happened. So like I had only heard stuff from my mom, which I actually watched the film with, and so she had a little bit more of an insight into what was going on because she was watching the news, when this whole story was playing out. and that helps a little bit. But yeah, I do feel like even I kind of came in very like unbiased in my opinion about her as a person, and I came out feeling very a little bit mixed, because there. But I think what the film does really well is it doesn't really necessarily paint her as a hero or a villain, somewhere in between, which mirrors what a lot of people are. It's kind of the white hat, black hat mentality. There's really most people are kind of like in that gray in between. There's not necessarily a really good person and a really bad person. All of us by nature, we're a mixture of, of both. And I think that's what makes her just a really sympathetic character. And then something you also pointed out too about how, you pointed out the Wolf of Wall Street. I really think after the Wolf of Wall Street kind of came out, we got a lot of these hyper realism based on a true story, so insane you couldn't believe it could actually happen kind of comedy films. I really got a lot of Adam McKay vibes from this. What he did like with The Big Short and Vice. Kind of shot in a lot of these, similar ways where there's a lot of fourth wall breaking. There's a lot of absurdist, like wink, wink, satire commentary. And it's a very interesting way to depict, history. Obviously we've seen like revisionist history, kind of like what Tarantino's done. But this new kind of approach that I've seen a couple directors doing with these biopics is they're not just straightforward biopics. They're trying to kind of change the situations by making them more dynamic, by throwing in, curveballs here and there, and even though some of them are probably, fictionalized for dramatic reasons, I think it is a really effective way of storytelling because it's presenting characters, sometimes not in the most realist depictions, but I like the idea that a lot of the films where the main characters they're portrayed through their own perspective. So, there's that dual interview between Tonya and her ex-husband where they're kind of explaining stuff from both of their perspectives. She's like, yeah, he hit me. And then he was like, yeah, I never hit her. And then you see them, and then you actually watch it, and they're beating the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And so there's that dynamic where it's played for humor, but obviously it also goes into play where there's that mentality. I think she keeps bringing up like, oh, it's not my fault. And I forgot who it was. I think it's her mom says, you're always blaming other people. I don't know if I got that wrong, but and so I really like how they played with that kind of that overarching theme that's a big flaw in her character if she doesn't take responsibility. And I think that's what makes her like a very sympathetic character.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. There's a lot of unrelatable narrator aspects to this where all of them are unrelatable narrators. But yeah, moving on, what is your number 2 movie?
My number 2 film is Possessor, which is a little bit of it's probably the newest film, at least I have on my list. It's a 2020 film directed by Brandon Cronenberg.
Our next contract's a big one. The target is the CEO of the largest operation in the U.S. You'll be binding to Colin Tate. We can't afford any mistakes on this one.
Ready?
What's with you today?
What do you mean?
The story is essentially about a girl named Tasa Vos, an elite corporate assassin who uses brain implant technology to take control of other people's bodies to terminate high-profile targets. As she sinks deeper into her latest assignment, Vos becomes trapped inside a mind that threatens to obliterate her. Now, Brandon Cronenberg, the director of this, I believe he only has one other feature under his belt besides this film, but this is obviously his major stepping point. It premiered at Sundance earlier this year, got a lot of positive acclaim for it. He's obviously the son of David Cronenberg, who is, made a name for himself with these kind of body horror films. And so his son is obviously taking a lot of inspiration from his dad's work and kind of creating his own path. I've never seen any of his dad's films. I definitely want to, but just, seeing this film, I was just on its own, if there was no other inspirations behind it, I think it's, in my opinion, it's like my favorite film of the year. Wow. I think it's really excellently done in the way it depicts, it's mixed, how it depicts violence. I saw this interview that I thought was really interesting with Brandon, where he was talking about, the way he uses violence in the film. And he said, I think it's a lot more disturbing in more PG-13 films that are coming out. There's this craze, there's the hyper-violent rated R films, and then there's the PG-13 films. And he's like, in your average superhero movie, there's a battle with the superheroes in the city, and they're like destroying buildings and stuff. He's like, there's thousands of people dying, there's civilians getting hurt here and there and stuff like that, but it's kind of glossed over, And he said, I think that's a lot more disturbing, that glossed over violence in these big PG-13 films that can't show grotesque violence, than films that actually depict violence, which I thought was a very, interesting quote. And it's a really interesting critique, I guess, of how we see violence in films. I think, kind of like how, we talked a little bit earlier about Nicholas Winding Refn, and just how violence is depicted. And obviously there is a lot of strong violence in this film, but I think it's used very well. I think it's used expertly in a lot of different shots. The color palette of the film is a lot of red. There's a lot of red and orange tint, and that's kind of and there's a lot of scenes with blood in it. And I think what's really interesting about this film as well is it kind of makes you start to question a lot of ideas of, are our thoughts our own, And I remember, I think a couple months ago, I think Elon Musk, he was saying how he has a brain implant chip idea that he has, So what's so terrifying about this film is the idea that some of the stuff that's in the film, it's we're maybe a couple years away from it. Some of this potentially, obviously, some of it's, it's used over dramatically. But I think that's another terrifying aspect of the film is, what if someone could, control your body without you being able to, and essentially destroy your life over the span of a couple hours. But what I really liked about this film in particular is not only about the actual victims, but the actual perpetrator. I'm blanking on her name, but the woman who's essentially the assassin is showing
Andrea
the psychological toll. I'm sorry?
Andrea Riseborough.
Oh, that's right. And she was also excellent a couple years ago in Mandy with Nicolas Cage. And so I was really happy to see her in another film. But what I really loved about this film is it shows the strain that happens on her in her personal life, because you first see one of her murders one of her assassination attempts, and then you meet her husband and her child at her home, and you really see she is just kind of, a mother, and she is a wife, and she's all these other things, but she has a secret other life where she's an assassin. And so you do understand why she does what she does, but you also do feel bad for her, because the people she's killing are sometimes do deserve it, and sometimes they don't. But overall, I was really blown away by most of the film. I'm really interested to see what you think, because I think you said you saw this pretty recently before the recording, right?
Yeah. This is the type of movie where I had it on, and I'm not great with horror, so I kind of had a second screen up where I was replying to some emails and stuff like that. And watching, I'm just like, oh, this is interesting. It's okay. And then after it finished, I'm just like, there's some parts that really confuse me. But every day, I think I watched it 2 or 3 days ago now. Every day I've been thinking about it. I was like, wow, this movie's really weird, and it's kind of sitting with me weirdly, and I'm thinking about it a lot. And I think that's basically the hallmark of a well-made movie. If it sort of sticks with you and makes you think about it, is something you really want to have. And I think Brandon Cronenberg would absolutely take that as a compliment, where I watched it and I'm like, I don't really know what to think about it, but I'm gonna keep thinking about this. And I'm sure he probably enjoy hearing that more than just be like, oh, it was the best thing ever sort of thing, sort of gut reaction, where I really think he wants you to sit with this and feel uncomfortable with it. The violence is really disturbing at times. You talked about the first early assassination. It was done by stabbing with a short knife, and repeatedly over and over again they replay this murder of a knife going in a throat and blood coming out, and it's done in a slow fashion, and you see the knife slowly coming out of the neck, and it just sort of turns your stomach. in a way of like, this is clearly fake. I know it's fake, and it seems excessive. I've never seen someone being stabbed, so I can't really compare it. But like, as far as movie standards go, this is fake because it's so realistic, and it just sort of sticks with you, and you're just like, oh, why? What's the importance of it? Why is this happening? And all this sort of stuff. And so I think the fact that it sticks with you is probably a good thing. Off the top of my head, after I finish it, I'd be like, oh yeah, this was probably near the bottom of Neon films. But the more I think about it, I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe it moves up one notch, and maybe it moves up another one notch, and maybe it's not so bad of a movie. But I think you talked about Andrea Riseborough's performance. I think it also, you need the super strong counterpoint in Christopher Abbott's performance. The two of them, because she takes over his body for most of the movie, and there's actually sequences where they're talking at the same time. You see his mouth moving, and you hear both of their voices, like one on top of the other. So you've got his, which is a very deep voice, and hers, which is a bit of a higher voice, going over top of each other, saying at the exact same time. And it's just one of those real mindfuck movies where you're gonna think about this one for days. You're gonna wake up from your sleep and be like, oh man, I had a dream about how their faces were splitting apart, and they were sticking to each other, and he's pulling her face mask over him and stretching the eyeballs, and it's just like, there's just so much going on. And I think the thing that I love the most about this movie is all the effects were practical. They shot this in camera. None of this was CGI. So, there's a bit of a sequence where there's a little particle that's vibrating between his two fingers. That's a piece of styrofoam that they vibrate it using sound waves. They crank the decibels up to a level that would vibrate material. And they managed to insert sound waves into a running fountain, so it looks like the fountain was frozen. And just all the different things going on behind the scenes that you think are like, just subtly off, just a little bit off. Those were all done so specifically and so deliberately that's the hallmark of a fantastic director that is so in charge of his craft.
No, I fully agree with what you're saying, and I had no idea about the practical effects, and I think that definitely makes me appreciate the film even more. And I think another thing about it is it's definitely a very pulpy, kind of sort of sci-fi horror film, and it's definitely kind of a thrower back to a lot of older films, which I think is really interesting. And I do really see this as a jumpstart for Brandon as a director and his career. I'm sure because he talked about it took him years to write this, to get funding and financing and distribution, and so it's really exciting that his voice is being able to be heard, because he definitely has something to say, and he definitely has unique, interesting ideas at play. And like you mentioned, I love the cast. I love Christopher's performance as well, when you're talking about how, when they're both speaking at the same time, it's very off-putting, but it takes a lot out of an actor to pull something like that off and have that range. And you're right. It's one of those films where it's like, there's always something a little bit off. And that's what I really appreciated, is I was thinking about it for days after. And I think that's just an interesting point about what the whole of cinema is. It's one of those things is, when is a film good and when does it become great? Is it great because you remember a couple scenes, or is it that we're like, really like, oh, that was a cool scene, there was like blood and stuff? Or was it interesting because, something resonated like with you? Like, did it plant like a seed in your own mind? Did it tap into like some of your own fears that you have about like your own identity? And I think there's a lot of interesting ideas at play, and I'm really excited to see what he does next.
Yeah, I wrote in my Letterboxd review, if this movie was, the exact movie it is, but if it was directed by Ari Aster, it would be the biggest movie of the year.
Right, 100%, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you have it on the money.
Because it's sort of similar stylistically to Midsommar and Hereditary, where it's a very visceral horror experience that taps into something psychological. And so the two of them should be compared favorably to each other. And if this had Ari Aster's name in front of it, an A24, I think it would be the biggest indie hit of the year.
That's another interesting point you make too, as well as about because this film was distributed by Neon and not A24. And if A24, because it's one of those films where it would fall in line what A24 has been making in recent years. So that's another interesting idea of where distribution companies are now, they're more than distribution companies. You know, if it's on a trailer now, people are already sold on it before they've even seen it. It's like, oh, it's by A24? Like, oh, it's by Neon. Like, oh, I've seen a couple films by this distribution company and they're great. I definitely want to check it out. So I definitely see we're getting at where now it's a brand thing now.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting approach that's the direction I guess films are going in, where, you know, these companies are, you know, picking up these up and coming directors and seeing what they have. But yeah, no, I totally love your point you made about Ari Aster. Yeah, no, overall, I really like this film, and yeah.
I think the last thing I'm going to point out is, you know, in our A24 episode, we talked about the movie Enemy, the Denis Villeneuve one, and much like this, it's shot in Toronto. I don't know if you knew that when you were watching it, but it's hilarious where, you know, I realized early on the first murder sequence, she's going up an elevator and they're showing, you know, the city skyline as they're going up the elevator. And that's Scotiabank Arena where the Leafs and the Raptors play in Toronto. And so, of course, I'm like, hey, it's Scotiabank Arena. But then later on, I can't remember the name of the company that he works for. It's like Zoutros or something like that. That is the CBC head office, which is our national broadcaster. I've been in there several times for different reasons. I've gone in for auditions there. I've gone in to watch concerts there and filming, stuff like that. But just hilarious where I've been like in the exact locations that they are, where I'm like, this is the CBC head office, which, like, as a Canadian filmmaker, come on, you cannot do that.
Yeah, that's hilarious, honestly. I didn't even notice that, but
They did a good job of not showing the CN Tower, where unlike Enemy, which was very explicitly taking place in Toronto, this was more subtle where, like, obviously, as someone in California, you wouldn't recognize, but like me being in Toronto, like, I recognize the streets. I recognize the skyscrapers, that sort of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
All right, so I'm going to move on to my number 2 movie. Now, I had such a tough time. My number 1 and number 2 are almost tied with each other, and I almost feel guilty putting this at number 2. But for me, it is Portrait of a Lady on Fire from 2019, directed by Celine Sciamma. And it's about how on an isolated island in Brittany at the end of the 18th century, a female painter is obligated to paint a wedding portrait of a young woman. I had watched this when it came out, and I really enjoyed it. And then I rewatched it in preparation for this show, and it just sort of cemented my love for it. It is just so delicate and beautiful. And I don't know what it is, but for some reason, anytime there's a movie about art, I don't know if it's just me noticing it, but for some reason, I feel like the director and the cinematographer make sure that every shot looks like a painting. Everything is so beautiful to look at. The color is perfect. The setting is perfect. The framing is perfect. The way the actors are positioned are perfect. Everything about it, you sense this great deal of art being involved in it. And so I don't know if it's just because, you know, they're talking about painting and they're showing painting, and so I'm connecting the dots, or if it's, you know, they take extra special effect because, you know, you're going to be compared to it. But at the end of the day, you know, this is a love story between two people who can't be in love because they're women, because of the time period they're in, because of the obligations they feel, all this sort of stuff. But literally every single shot and scene is just a feast of beauty of what's going on, and the longingness in their eyes, and the way that you can tell that they're feeling with subtle glances and flinches, and the way they blink their eyes, everything you can feel in it. And of course, there's a couple really key integral parts. This movie has almost no music throughout. There's two big important scenes with music. The first one, they're at this sort of bonfire feast of all women going on, and all the women in the island start doing this chant, and it's just so overwhelmingly beautiful. And then at the end, at the opera, when one of the characters is watching the other watch opera, and this swell of music, and it's the same sort of feeling, but instead you're feeling sadness and regret instead of love and hopefulness. And it's just one of those things where there's just so much going on. And I love it, that the fact that almost the whole movie, there's no men in this. And then like almost towards the end, like past the 3/4 mark, a guy shows up and it's just like, whoa, what are you doing here, buddy? You need to get out of here. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think of this one. Had you seen this one?
Yes, I have. And if not for my number one pick, I definitely would have replaced it with this.
Oh.
Because I do love this film so much. And I hadn't seen the trailer for it. I had seen the poster. You know, all the reviews that came in were raving about it, and I was like, I have to check this out. And so it's been a couple months, so it's not as fresh in my mind, but I like what you said. It feels like a living painting. Like every single shot is so gorgeous. In particular, I love all the shots down at the beach, down at the beach,
yeah,
where they're, you know, even where they're positioned, you know, as opposed to the camera, they're these little tiny figures, you know, in these large landscape portraits, if you will, that it looks like. And just the skill involved with every single shot, it was just so beautiful. Like it was one of those films, you know, where I gasped sometimes. I was just like, wow, I was so taken aback by just like the sheer beauty on display, because I hadn't seen a film like that before. Another thing that I love too is I don't even remember what the actresses' names were, but the dual performance that they have is amazing. Mm-hmm. They're two French actresses, but they play off each other so well. And what I love most about the film is how through most of the beginning they don't talk very much. It's mostly just glances, and there's a lot of shots of the eyes, and that's what I love about this, because you know, like how the eyes are really the gateway to the soul. And you can really feel that in this film. You can, like you were talking about, there's that sense of longing and loneliness you can see in their eyes when they're just, you know, staring at each other and then like looking away and staring and looking away. And you can feel that because, you know, normally, you know, if they were talking and stuff and they were just like saying things to each other, you wouldn't notice it as much. But just that nonverbal communication of just music and then just, you know, no dialogue whatsoever, just them looking, it just elevates it. It's so much more powerful. And I was so on edge with the film, even in like the last, you know, 5 minutes, you know, I was like, I wasn't actually breathing the last couple minutes. Like I literally like when the credits finally hit, I was like, wait, was I not breathing? Because I was like, I had to suck in some air and I didn't even realize it because I was immediately entranced in this world because it was dripping with beauty, but I could really feel for the characters. You know, I could really understand what they were going through in a way. And this film, it's beautiful. There's no other way of describing it. I love it. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, you're talking about gasping, and so I watched the first one. Rushing to cram it in for last year's end of the year list, and I rewatched it. My wife hadn't seen it, and so we watched it together because she had missed it. I watched it while she was out or something like that. And I think there's a couple moments in particular where the first time you see it, where Marianne is like walking through the house late at night, and she turns around and she sees Heloise just completely in the dark, but she's wearing this like floor length white dress, and she's like completely bright light spotlight directly on her, and she looks like a ghost. And you see it for a few seconds, and as soon as you see it, she literally appears like a ghost for a few seconds and then leaves. And my wife was like, whoa, like literally audibly like that. Or like, I think that's the absolute like highest praise or hallmark that you could do something for a movie where if it literally startles you to make an audible gasp like that. And they do it, I think, 2 or 3 times in the movie. You see it, and every time it's so striking because the frame is so dark, so pitch black, and then she shows up as this like white light, just like literally like an angel. And later on we learn that it's basically a made-up memory she has of her. The way she's dressing in her final dress and that sort of thing, and that's the way Marianne chooses to remember her as, and basically as an artist. But you see that the first time, and it almost kind of hits you like a horror movie where you're like, is this real? Is this not real? What's going on? It's just so striking that you can't help but like gasp at it. And I'm assuming that's what you were talking about when you were saying you were gasping in the movie.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those times. it's one of those films that just entrances you, it latches onto you, and it doesn't let go.
Yeah.
And I really want to rewatch it just for the sheer, beauty of it. It's just great.
It's definitely better on a rewatch because you don't need to focus on the plot. You can actually focus sort of on their like micro emotions. All right, what's your number one movie, Royce?
My number one pick is a film. You might have heard of it, possibly. It kind of won Best Picture this year and a bunch of other Oscars. But it's Parasite, the 2019 film directed by Bong Joon-ho. The story centers around an all unemployed Ki Taek family. I probably butchered that. Takes peculiar interest in the wealthy and glamorous Parks family for their lively until they get wrapped and entangled in an unexpected incident. So I'm assuming that everyone that's probably listening to this, a lot of people have seen Parasite at this point, and for people who have, most people were probably floored by it. I was completely riveted. The first time I actually saw this, I got to see it in this theater. It wasn't nearby me. I had to drive a little bit of ways away, but I went with a couple friends, and it was in a Korean neighborhood. It was this really cool movie theater, kind of hidden, kind of tucked back. But when me and my friend went in, we were literally the only white guys in there. Literally everyone in there, because it was like in Koreatown, and so it was right when it had come out. So I hadn't heard much about it. I just had heard really good things, and it was a fantastic experience being in there with a fresh audience. Every seat was filled, and I really miss that, especially with the whole pandemic. I miss being in a crowded, packed theater, but it was a fantastic experience, just seeing it up on the big screen. And it's just one of those films I genuinely believe that don't come too often. And a lot of, even on Letterboxd, it's got a 4.6 rating. It's like the highest rating ever on there. It's got the reviews, by critics and audiences are obviously, everyone really enjoys the film. And a lot of things that can be said about this film have probably been said. So I'm just probably repeating what I've already heard. But I do really genuinely enjoy this film. And I think the reason why is because it just feels like such a landmark. There's this idea that I think every couple of years there's always like a film that defines that particular decade. A lot of, especially with the 2010s coming to a close, a lot of people were talking about like, oh, what film sums up the decade? A lot of people pointed to, The Social Network, being a defining film for that decade, with the introduction of social media, and Facebook, and how that's been so much more relevant today. It's the films that really encompass what's going on in just society as a whole, like what's going on around the world. And I think what Parasite pulls off so well, it's an immaculate film, first off. Like on a technical acting level, everything is pitch perfect. But what Bong Joon-ho, I believe, does an amazing job at is differentiating the idea of class. And what does it mean to be of a different class? Obviously in the film, there's the poor family and there's the rich family they're serving, and that manipulation that takes place. And there's a lot of different thematic elements that are at play, a lot of different symbolism about what is the parasite, who is feeding off who. And some of it's metaphorical, as one, I think the son points out, this is still metaphorical. But there's a lot of metaphor at play. Some of it actually is just symbolism, and a lot of it actually becomes literal symbolism later on in the film. There's a lot of plot twists where things just crank up to 11. But I think just the whole film is streamlined brilliant. I love it so much. I actually got the Blu-ray copy of it on Criterion that I've been waiting for. So I'm really stoked about that. I'm glad to have a personal copy because it just feels like one of those films that doesn't come around too often. And I absolutely, as you can probably tell at this point, I adore this film. I think it's honestly one of the best films to come out in years. I'm so glad I was able to catch it in theaters. And I'm really happy it swept the Oscars. I think it genuinely did deserve every Oscar it got nominated for. And I know there was a lot of controversy around it, but it's really encouraging to see even though it was a film made by an esteemed filmmaker like Bong Joon-ho, we've made a couple films in the past that have, received a lot of praise. I think why a lot of people love this film is it's a story that we can all latch onto, no matter if you're lower, middle, or upper class. Everyone understands a certain character in the story. It's one of those. It's a very universal tale of a lot of things. It's a lot of human wants and needs. Where do we exist compared to other people? What will we do to get ourselves and other people a much better life? And I really do think this is going to be a film that we're going to be talking about, decades from now. We're going to be teaching about it in film school. We're going to be teaching about it in philosophy classes. It's just one of those films where you watch. I remember the first time I saw it, I knew this is going to be a defining film. And it's so great about it too. It has such rewatchability. It's such an enjoyable film. It just flies by. It's one of those films where I can easily see, watching it, at least once a year. But it's definitely, it's funny. It's, serious, sometimes really terrifying. And it just encompasses, everything I really want out of a film.
I am so glad you put this on your list and specifically so high, just because I like it. I just don't love it as much as everyone else is loving it. If I was to look on my list right now, I think I have it listed as maybe 8 or 9 for my neon films. So I'm so happy that you have it so high, because I know I'm gonna get tons of hate for this. I like it. I like it.
You will.
I know. I like it. I like it a lot. I just don't love it. I appreciate everything about it, and I think you hit on so many great points. It just, for some reason, it just doesn't connect with me, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time belaboring that point, because I think you were so articulate in explaining why you like it and why so many people do love it and connect with it. So I'm not going to take any of that away and be, the Debbie Downer about this. But yeah, I thank you for having that as your number one movie, because, any traction this podcast was making, people would be like, screw this guy. He doesn't know anything about movies. He doesn't even want to talk about Parasite.
I know everyone that was listening to this, when they heard Parasite, they were just like, yes, somebody did it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna go with my number one movie, because I don't want to trash Parasite. It is a good movie. It's just not on my list. My number one is Apollo 11, directed by Todd Douglas Miller.
The whole Apollo program was designed to get 2 Americans to the lunar surface and back again to Earth safely. The enormity of this event is something that only history will be able to judge.
Apollo 11 has very simply been given the mission of carrying men to the moon, landing them there, and bringing them safely back.
I can feel it in here when Apollo. Okay, I'll flight controllers, go to
A look at the Apollo 11 mission to land on the moon, led by Commander Neil Armstrong and pilots Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins. This was a movie that, you just sort of hear that description, you hear the title, whatever. You think you've seen this movie before. There's been a million space landing moon documentaries, that sort of thing. First Man came out with Ryan Gosling, I think 2 years ago. We've all seen the story. This is completely different. This is a documentary that is using, of the time footage, 70 millimeter unseen footage that people have not seen before, that they were able to take alternate takes from news footage, different cameras that didn't make it into the final broadcast, the actual footage shot by Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin on the spaceship. It is gorgeous. It is beautiful. There are no talking heads. There are no interviews. There are entire chunks of the movie where there is no dialogue. Anytime you get dialogue, it's because it is a news camera either literally interviewing someone or picking up the background noise, because there'll be cameras set up in the command station in the space shuttle at Cape Canaveral, I believe it was at, in Florida, where they just have the camera set up, and so you get to hear all the different people being like, oh yeah, you good to go, all right, let's track where you're at, all right, this is what your fuel is, all this sort of stuff. The fact that they're able to do away with any of this sort of traditional documentary tropes and have a movie that is so exciting and edge of your seat and gorgeous to look at is just an absolute testament from the footage that they were able to gather and put together, and how captivating it all is. Like this is a movie that I kick myself. I had a friend text me, you know, like, hey, this movie is playing on an IMAX screen, one of like the few special super IMAX mega theaters that we have here in the city. You know, like every city has a couple IMAX screens, but like there's a couple, like, you know, you go for like the super special screening. And I kick myself that I missed the opportunity to go and watch this with him. I don't know if my friend Scott Murdoch went and actually saw it in this screen, but I know he had messaged our friend group and was like, hey, we should go ahead and see this. And I didn't go, and I am kicking myself for watching this on my stupid home TV. This movie needs to be seen on the biggest screen, the loudest speakers you can get.
Well, hey man, at least you got to do it on a TV, because I watched it on my laptop.
Oh, Royce, you're breaking my heart.
I know, the horror. Dude, I'd be kicking myself too, because I would 100% watch this on a 70 millimeter, IMAX screen, because, I think you did a really great job of explaining it. Like, even though it didn't go on my list, I was able to watch it last week, and I was so riveted by it just as much as you were, just how it was, how it was edited together just so well. It felt like
it's like an action
movie. It literally feels like it. It feels like it's happening in real time. How it doesn't even feel like a documentary, like you said, like no talking heads or anything like that. It was just there was some voiceover of the different people that were like commentating on what was happening, but it does really give a lot more levity to the actual moon landing and what actually took place, and how monumentous of an event it was, not only for the U.S. but for the world. It was a huge cultural upheaval. A man literally stepping on a piece of rock thousands of miles in space, and it really that's what I'm sure you could probably agree with this too. I think it gives a lot more brevity even to Kennedy's famous speech at the very end. Talking about why we choose to go to the moon, and it really, I welled up with a lot of emotion at the end of it, because you really saw how it literally took years and years to get to that point, and what a moment it was for all of humanity, to show like we could shoot for the stars, we could do all these things. And I think it's a film that should be shown in classrooms. I think, why are we watching like Apollo, like all these other like documentaries or like these like film dramatizations? Like, this is the definitive, if we could archive what happened, and the whole process of the moon landing, this film would be it.
Yeah, 100%. That's so accurate. It just sort of blows your mind. You watch some of the shots, some of the sequences where you're like, no, this can't be real. This has to be CGI. This has to be a recreation on, maybe a space mission from a few years ago, a rocket launch from that. No, this is like they got the cameras right up to the boosters as they're, blowing up off the ground, going into the air, and you watch it in the high definition that they were able to capture it, and it just sort of blows your mind. And you just have to be so thankful that they had the crew that was there to shoot this, because imagine if this stuff was just lost to history, that we only had the grainy black and white news footage from ABC News or NBC or whatever it was, and that's all we had. That's what we were stuck with. Or the limited feed that we could get of, when they were calling to talk to the president, that's the only thing that they released. No, the fact that we have their actual comms communications and the actual on-camera footage, like this is monumental historical stuff where, history books are written, but maybe we can have digital history books, and this is a digital history book.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that was really well said. And yeah, this is a whole, like, it blows my mind as well that we have all this footage from back then. Because, like you said, it would be so sad if, we only had like the grainy, footage of all the events that took place. And yeah, it's definitely it builds on what you've already learned, like in school, and it kind of elevates that. And I hope that this process is done with a lot of other world events, because like you said, instead of having just textbooks, we have these kind of films as a way to kind of archive our history, for future generations to really see, these huge events in human history as kind of these, I'm blanking on the word, like these time capsules, if you will, of these moments, because that's essentially what this film is. It's a time capsule. And even though it didn't make my top 5 list, I still really enjoyed this film, and I would love to see it on the big screen one day.
Yeah, me too. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, I actually posted a survey asking people what they thought about Neon, and I'm going to reveal the results.
Why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Royce play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
All right, so as I teased before, I posted a little survey on Reddit and Twitter and got a lot of responses. I got 112 people that responded to this Neon survey. I'm going to read out some of the responses. So I asked, how many Neon movies have you seen? And I broke it up into quarters. So under 10, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, and 30 to 37. With this company that's kind of has smaller releases, it wasn't really shocking, but 72 people said under 10, with the next closest answer being 32 people saying 10 to 19. I fall in that second category. I believe you're probably right on the border. Is that accurate?
I'm not sure on what. I think I might be. I think I'm definitely under 10.
Okay.
I don't think I'm anything higher than that now.
Yeah, so it isn't super surprising. They haven't had as many, I would say, box office hits as even A24 doesn't have as many box office hits, but they're definitely more renowned and have bigger audiences. So it doesn't really shock me that more people have not seen Neon films. Now I asked a sort of a two-pronged question. First, what was your favorite Neon release? And then I asked for your two follow-up movies of what would be your second and third, because I asked if I was to just say what was your favorite Neon release, I was pretty safe to assume what the answer was be, and it was Parasite. Overwhelmingly 66 people said that was their favorite Neon movie, with Portrait of a Lady on Fire being second at 27, followed very far behind I, Tonya at 6, Palm Springs at 3, Apollo 11, Honeyland, and Ingrid Goes West all at 2. So there is absolutely no shock there. And then what was interesting is I sort of tallied up what the runner-up would be. So between Parasite being the number one favorite and then the runners-up position, a total of 102 out of 112 people ranked Parasite in their top 3. So absolutely no shock from there. And Portrait of a Lady on Fire, just as prolific. Between the top 3 slots, it had 78 out of 112 responses.
I mean, there's no shock there. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I guess that just kind of goes to show the longevity of some of these films. But hopefully Neon becomes a studio like A24, or like it's definitely on its way to become one of those distribution companies that can hopefully, help make a lot of great, hopefully, future classics.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they're on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Other responses included, I'll sort of go in order there. Palm Springs, I, Tonya, Ingrid Goes West, Honeyland, Three Identical Strangers, Apollo 11, Possessor, Vox Lux, Colossal, Monos, Loose, and sort of just goes on from there where you're just getting only 1 or 2 votes for them. But in total, a whole bunch of movies ended up getting a nod there, so I'm happy that there was a bit of a diversity there. I'm glad I didn't just say what was your favorite Neon film, because it really just would have ended up being Parasite and Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I was curious to hear what else other people thought. And then I also, I left an optional spot of people to add any final comments they had of what their general thoughts of Neon were. And there's a couple that I highlighted here, and that people were saying things like creative movies, especially compared to other companies. Everything I've seen has been consistently good. And then sort of to what you were saying, I think Neon is more accessible company compared to A24. All Neon distributed films feel different to each other. And then, if you want to get something a little more tepid, it's an all right build. They definitely need to get more films, but they're very small right now, so I don't think it's worth comparing to other companies. And the fact that Neon put out arguably the 2 best movies of the decade last year, Parasite and Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it makes me very excited to see what they'll do in the future. It makes me happy to see them distribute foreign films to such a wide audience. A lot of the comments definitely sort of went back to this idea of comparing them to A24 as basically being a light form for them, which you had kind of mentioned a couple times. And so, yeah, I'm not really shocked by the sort of comments I was receiving.
No, I'm not really shocked either. And yeah, I do agree with a lot of what people were saying. Like, they are a relatively new company. And yeah, I feel like, A24, one of the only flaws there is, some films do really feel kind of similar to each other. It's like there's certain cliches. And so far, I haven't seen too many Neon films yet, but they're definitely, they obviously have their own interests in the films they're making, but it's all very exciting. I think in the long run, I think we're going to see a lot more interesting films coming out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see what they've got coming up. And the last comment I'll read is from Callum McNabb, who's a friend of the show from Scare Traducing. He's been on here a couple times. I asked him what his favorite shows were, his favorite Neon movies, and his was Assassination Nation and Parasite are the 2 I watched the most. Very excited for Possessor, and still haven't seen Portrait of a Lady on Fire, so need to get around to that ASAP. So he definitely sort of agrees with your line of thinking of both Assassination Nation and Parasite. So you've got a fan in that corner.
Yes.
Well, Royce, it was excellent having you on again. I am so happy to bring you back. This is 2 shows we've kind of had similarly. I'm going to link them in the show notes for people to check out. And I definitely will be having you on in the future. I know we were originally planning around this time to be talking about Denis Villeneuve and sort of ranking his films in preparation for Dune, which was supposed to come out early December or something like that. And that's obviously been pushed back a year, and you're still going to do that next year. But we definitely are going to have you back sooner than that.
Well, yeah, thank you. And then, thanks again for the opportunity to be back on here. I had a great time.
Awesome. So glad to hear that. Once again, thank you to Royce for coming on the show. Make sure you check out the other 2 episodes that he was on, the ranking of A24 films and Life During Quarantine. They will be linked in the show notes, and we'll be sure to have Royce back on the show in due time. Another thing I want to mention is I was just a guest on Please Watch This. I was a guest of theirs previously as we discussed The Life Aquatic, one of my all-time favorite movies. But I was just on to talk about Before Sunrise, the Richard Linklater, Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy movie. And this is episode 70. It just came out, so make sure you check out Please Watch This. I join hosts Sam and Hugh, 2 hilarious and very knowledgeable movie fans. We always have a great time when we chat. Their show is definitely worth a listen. It's a unique show, movie podcast, where they're doing some stuff that isn't like anything else going on. So please make sure you check that out. There'll be a link to that in the show notes as well. And in exciting news, Sam and Hugh will be joining the ContraZoom pod for an episode in a few weeks as we tackle a remake. I'm not going to spoil too much here, but if you listen to their show, I talk all about what they'll be coming on to do. So please make sure you do that. And I'm very much looking forward to having them finally come on ContraZoom Pod. That's the end of the show. What is your favorite Neon movie? Send me an email, contrazoompod@gmail.com, and I'll read it on a future episode. You can also follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @ContraZoomPod. Today's show is presented by Aesthetic Magazine. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. And if you could rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, that will be a huge help for us growing and finding new listeners. Thanks for listening.